I used to think I was better than everyone else. I walked around with a sense of superiority, always ready to criticize others for their mistakes or even just for being themselves. People said I had a holier-than-thou attitude, and they were right. I believed I was flawless, incapable of making mistakes or falling into any situation that could embarrass me. I often looked at others in unfortunate circumstances and thought, that could never be me. My fiancé, on the other hand, always tried to teach me that life could happen to anyone, that even the best-laid plans could fall apart. He reminded me constantly that nobody was perfect and everyone made mistakes. But I never listened. I always brushed him off, convinced I was different. Eventually, he gave up trying to convince me. Little did I know that the universe had a lesson prepared for me, a lesson that would humble me in the most unexpected way. It all began at my 28th birthday party. The food was so amazing that I wanted to personally thank the chef. I hadn't expected to meet someone so breathtakingly handsome behind the buffet table. When he told me he was the chef, I froze for a moment. I had always imagined chefs as older, rugged men, not someone who looked like he'd just stepped out of a romance novel. I barely managed to get out my compliments without embarrassing myself further. His smile alone could melt glaciers, but I forced myself to walk away. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. A few days later, my younger brother called me with the most exciting news. He had just proposed to his girlfriend, and she said yes. I was over the moon for him, but my excitement quickly turned to shock when he told me they'd set a wedding date, just 6 weeks away. I couldn't believe it. I'd been engaged for 6 months without setting a date, and now my little brother was about to get married before me. I tried to convince him to slow down, but he was set on marrying the love of his life as soon as possible. He asked for my help with the wedding preparations, especially with finding a caterer. Without thinking twice, the first person who came to mind was the handsome chef from my birthday party. The only problem was, I didn't have his number. My fiancé had handled all the catering arrangements for my birthday. When I asked him for the chef's contact information, he was more than happy to help. That was the kind of man I was engaged to. Kind, thoughtful, and always ready to lend a hand. He sent me the catering company's details, but instead of simply calling, I decided to visit the restaurant myself. Deep down, I knew exactly why I wanted to go in person. I wanted to see him again. When I arrived, the receptionist informed me that the chef wasn't taking any more jobs at the moment. But I wasn't one to take no for an answer. After a little sweet-talking, I managed to convince her to give me his number. I called him relentlessly. Over 30 times in 3 hours, until he finally picked up. The sound of his voice made my heart race in a way I couldn't explain. When I told him what I wanted, he agreed to meet with me, but only if I agreed to have lunch at his restaurant. I didn't understand his tactic at first, but when he served me the most delicious meal I'd ever tasted, I realized he was showing me why he was the best at what he did. I practically melted with every bite. After finishing my meal, I asked him to cater my brother's wedding. He hesitated at first, but eventually he agreed. I was ecstatic. I felt like a hero for coming through for my brother, but deep down I knew my excitement wasn't just about the wedding. It was about him. As the wedding preparations progressed, I found myself drawn to the chef more and more. He had this magnetic presence, confident, passionate, and undeniably attractive. When the tasting session finally happened, I was supposed to just sit back and observe, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. The way he spoke, the way his lips moved, it was like he was casting a spell on me. I don't know what came over me that day, but when the meeting ended, I found myself standing in front of him. Without thinking, I leaned in and pressed my lips against his. The kiss was deep, electric, like nothing I'd ever experienced before. In that moment, every promise I'd made to my fiancé, every ounce of self-control I thought I had, vanished. I didn't care about the consequences. I only cared about how he made me feel, alive, reckless, and completely out of control. When I finally pulled away, I was breathless, my heart pounding against my chest. I knew what I'd done was unforgivable, but the worst part was, I didn't regret it. I wanted more. Over the next few days, I found myself making excuses to see him, Little errands here and there, anything to be near him. We exchanged secret smiles, stolen glances, and whispered conversations. It was dangerous and I knew it. But I couldn't stop myself. I had always believed I was above making mistakes, that I was better than everyone else. But life has a funny way of humbling even the proudest souls. I was living proof that anyone, no matter how self-righteous, could fall. And I was falling. Hard. The moment I realized that 28 minutes had passed since I last spoke with the chef, a quiet thrill ran through me. I glanced his way, and when our eyes met, he gave me a subtle wink. Without hesitation, I returned the gesture, a secret acknowledgement of what was about to unfold. I turned to my fiancé and casually mentioned that I needed to use the restroom. He barely reacted, absorbed in conversation. As I slipped away from the dining area, my heart pounded with anticipation. The hallway was dimly lit, a quiet space away from the lively wedding reception. There, waiting for me just as planned, was the chef. We were alone. The moment our eyes met, I rushed into his arms, pressing my lips against his as though I had been starved for him for years. It was reckless, desperate, and intoxicating. We kissed with abandon, hands exploring each other with no regard for consequences. No fear, no caution. Then, suddenly I heard my name. The sound of it sent a jolt through my body. Froze. My lips slowly parted from the chef's, my breath heavy with panic. I turned toward the door, and there they were, my fiancé and my brother. Time seemed to slow as I saw their faces. My brother, his jaw clenched in silent fury, and my fiancé, who stood utterly still, his eyes dark with disbelief. My world shattered in that instant. The wedding, meant to be a celebration of my brother's love, had turned into an exposé of my betrayal. My brother was the first to act. Without a word, he stepped inside and locked the door behind him, ensuring no one else would witness the disgrace unfolding before them. He wasn't just angry, he was ashamed. His wedding had nearly been ruined because of me. He turned to my fiancé, who remained eerily silent. Then my fiancé finally spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "It doesn't matter," he said. Slowly, methodically, he removed the engagement ring from his finger. The weight of what was happening crushed me. He placed the ring on the floor, his expression unreadable. Then, in a calm, almost chilling voice, he said, "The moment this ring touches the ground, it's over between us." He turned and walked away. I instinctively tried to follow, to explain, to beg, but my brother blocked my path. His voice was cold. "You're not going to make a scene at my wedding. Whatever plea you have, take it somewhere else." I was trapped. My fiancé disappeared into the crowd, and I was left standing there, drowning in my own shame. That night, unable to accept what had happened, I went to my fiancé's house. I didn't expect him to be there, but he was, sitting outside staring up at the sky. When he noticed me, his gaze didn't soften. Instead, it hardened. "Why are you here?" he asked flatly. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I pleaded. "It was a mistake." His laughter was bitter, sharp. "A mistake," he repeated. "You don't believe in mistakes. You've always said that people act knowingly, that nothing just happens. So don't stand here and tell me this was a mistake." His voice grew harsher. "You knew exactly what you were doing." I refused to leave. No matter how much he yelled, no matter how many times he told me it was over, I stayed, desperate for him to reconsider. But then he did something that shattered me completely. Pulling out his phone, he made a call. "Hey, come over," he said, his voice dripping with challenge. "Bring some friends." I stared at him, confused. Then he looked directly at me and said, "If you think you were the only one with options, you're wrong." Minutes later, 3 women arrived. They walked right past me as if I didn't exist. My fiancé welcomed them into his home without a second glance in my direction. I tried to follow, pleading with him not to do this. But he didn't care. He shut the door in my face. Inside, the music was loud at first. But when it came time for him to take his revenge in the most intimate way possible, the music stopped. I heard everything. Every sound burned into my mind, a painful reminder that it was over. I left that night feeling utterly destroyed. In the following days, my humiliation only grew. My brother, who had always been my closest confidant, was furious. He revealed something I hadn't known. There had been a surprise wedding planned for me. They had been organizing everything in secret, intending to tell me when all the preparations were finalized. The only thing I had to do was show up. But now there was no wedding. There was nothing. My brother's anger knew no bounds. "You're lucky you didn't ruin my wedding," he snapped. "If you had, I would never forgive you." He refused to let me help him move into his new home with his wife. He didn't want me near him. As if that weren't enough, my ex-fiancé made sure I saw what I had lost. He flaunted his new relationships openly, parading different women in front of me. It was clear he wanted me to suffer. The worst part, people started talking. We had been that couple, the one everyone admired. And now, I was the woman who had thrown it all away. The gossip was relentless. Then came the final blow. One day at the salon, I overheard a group of women speculating about my breakup. Some said my ex had been unfaithful all along, that he had finally shown his true colors. I kept quiet, not wanting to correct them. But then one of the women, one of the girls my ex had been spending time with, stood up. "You're shameless," she said, glaring at me. "Sitting here letting people talk about him like that when you were the one who cheated." The room fell silent. My secret was out. The chef, the man I had risked everything for, never reached out. Not once. It was as if he had vanished. I was completely alone. My friends abandoned me. My brother wanted nothing to do with me. And then my ex got engaged, to the very same woman who had defended him in the salon. They had only been together for a few months, yet he was ready to marry her. It took him over a year to propose to me, but with her it happened so fast. What did she have that I didn't? The pain was unbearable. I couldn't live like this anymore. The only way to escape was to leave. Before I left, I visited my brother. His wife, the woman who had every reason to hate me, welcomed me in with warmth. "I know you're judging me," I told her. She shook her head. "I don't understand why you did it," she admitted. "But I do understand that people make mistakes. And sometimes there's no fixing them. All you can do is start over." Her words gave me the strength I needed. Now, in a new city, I am rebuilding my life. Have a job. Have peace. And most importantly, I have learned my lesson. I will never make the same mistake again.